Well, hello everybody and welcome to Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident sculler who's respected by your peers. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about what happens when you chase advice, when you have multiple coaches and you're taking advice from several different people, and how that affects your sculling. What are the goods? What are the bads? What to do about it? When to do it? When not to do it? So if you've ever been challenged by, for example, a online rowing coach like myself, and you think I would like to try their advice, but you've already got a club coach, this is the episode for you. I'm Rebecca Caroe, and I'm joined by Marlene Royle.
Hello, Rebecca, and hello to our Faster Masters audience.
It's been an awesome week because this week we are going into a lot of detail that was stimulated by a question we got from a listener who is, I will go into the question a little bit later, but they're currently on a rowing camp. They're prepping for the Head of the Charles. So if you are in a similar situation, listen on and you'll hear the answers to her questions. Now, chasing advice, Marlene, when you were a full-time athlete, how did you run your own training? Did you have multiple coaches or did you only have a single coach?
When I was training after university, I had different coaches over the years. I think primarily at that time in the US system, there was not a camp system, and most of the small boats were all run by trials. So there were places where people tended to congregate together to train, but it was not at that in the early 80s, it was not as organized as it is now. I think in terms of athletes on that path having consistent coaches. So for some periods of time, I had a coach with me. I would usually, for winter training, perhaps sometimes, depending where I was going, try to find a coach. They all did, the ones that I did work with, did tend to agree in technique and philosophy. So I didn't really have a lot of conflicts in that terms, but I also was a coach myself at that time, and so I did a fair bit of designing my own training from the training program point of view. But I did, for example, for my strength training and some on-water training, I did consult, for example, like with Ed McNeely in those years, who was the physiologist for Rowing Canada. But yeah, it was mixed for sure.
Whereas I'm completely different. I joined rowing clubs and the club would have a coach or a couple of coaches and they would be allocated to different training groups. So for me, it was never a question. You were at this club for whatever reason and the club had the coach. I will say that there were situations where the athletes went to the captain and said, we're not happy with this coach. And, what can you do about it? Which actually is a long story, but it led me to meeting my husband.
Interesting.
Interesting. But nowadays, things are somewhat different. We've got the internet, we've got podcasts, we've got a lot of online material and people who have built a huge profile offering coaching advice online. So if you're watching live and you can name coaches that you listen to, we love that you're listening to us, but we're not stupid enough to think we're the only people who are out there giving advice. And so it's a big challenge because really and truly, how can you, an athlete, tell whether the person who says with the greatest confidence and certainty that this is what you should be doing, whether that's right for you or whether or not it's something that is reasonably dumb or in conflict with what your other coaches might be saying. So have you ever come up against this situation yourself, Lee?
All the time. I mean, having spent the majority of my career coaching in professional camps where you work with people from all different rowing clubs who have all different situations. Some have a club coach, some row in team boats, but came to the camp I was coaching at to learn sculling. Some have never had a coach. Some have a sculling coach. It's all different. When I predominantly coached in a private professional camp situation, you're dealing with people who come from all different walks of sculling life, and certainly when you're working with them, you have to take into context what they are learning at their club. If they tell you, you do not want to necessarily be in a situation that contradicts what they're learning at their club, but I think you have to be in a situation that offers other experiences or other options. If there's a particular point of the stroke cycle that the athlete is having difficulty with, you offer some perhaps another way to look at it. You offer some unique practice drills that may help them work that out. You might use a slightly different language, which clicks, whereas before there was perhaps some gap. So I do think it's something, when you work with people who are at a lot of different clubs, you have to be sensitive to the fact of, well, when they go back to their team, they've got to row in that team boat with that coach. They need to blend into the boat. So it's really important that they don't go back and try to do something different than the rest of their crew. But at the same time, I think, one of the reasons that they come to a camp is they want to learn more. And so as a coach in that situation, you're in the position to help them understand. It's not necessarily a competitive situation, so it's more of a learning situation to try new things, in a conducive environment, try new things, practice things, see if some different language works, and then you just, see how it goes.
What gives you the clue when you're coaching someone that what you're teaching is somewhat different from what they've experienced before, what they've been taught before?
Well, first you just watch them row. I think watching them row and seeing, what their power application is like, what their blade work skills are like. Is the blade pretty set in the water? Are they trying to pull the blade through the water and tearing a lot versus placing the blades and moving the boat? What is their rhythm like? What is the recovery sequence like? So I think just trying to get a handle on their basic skill level, first of all, is where you would start. And, certainly in a camp situation, you have limited time.
Mm.
So I think one of the tasks of the coach is, first look for that one element that's going to give you the biggest payback, right? Because
Yeah.
not all errors are equal. Okay. That's a Marleneism. Okay. Not all errors are equal. So, you might look for that. There might be one thing, maybe it's a rhythm change, maybe it's something else that will then correct 2 or 3 things down the line. So I think in a camp learning situation, when you have limited time, looking for what's the biggest element that's going to help that individual improve the most in this short period of time.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice. And of course, particularly in a camp, they've paid money. They want to feel that you've moved on, that you've progressed your own skills, and I really respect that in a coaching environment. One of the things that I notice particularly when you are coaching someone, and particularly if you're new to coaching, it's hard to know what's the next thing to teach. And as you say, seek the one element which gives the most payback. And Marlene and I are working on a skills checklist for beginner, intermediate, and advanced masters, rowers, and scullers, so that if you are a coach who's beginning to work with masters or is working already with masters, it gives you the clue about what is the next thing this one person needs to learn. because, as Marlene says, actually you can get a lot of payback from one thing rather than trying to finesse something that doesn't roll into supporting other parts of the stroke. That was it.
Yeah, well, and another thing I would bring up is, the self-taught sculler. And that's a whole different basket of apples, right? So as the self-taught sculler probably has not moved through skills the way someone else who has had a coach or in a learn to row program.
Mhm.
So you may be in a camp situation where that person obviously wants to improve. That's why they're there. We're assuming that's why they're there, or they're just, enjoying themselves, having a sculling vacation. But you have to understand that if it's a self-taught sculler, they may not have developed the handle skills, the blade work skills, some of the fundamental skills that are needed. So sometimes you have to undo things a little bit, or at least show them how to practice something to begin to change that pattern. Now, that pattern is not going to change. They're not going to perfect this during a camp. I think this is one point that I always, always, always make. I think in our opinion, what we want to do is give you the tools so that you can go home and practice, because it's the practice that's going to help you groove in a new pattern and learn new skills. But you need to know how to practice that. And I think that's what you can really learn in a camp, is you can learn the theory, you can learn how to practice, what to do, and then you've got to go home and you've actually got to develop the skill.
Which leads us nicely into the sponsor for this week's episode, which is Sculling Intensive. It is a virtual single sculling camp. It begins Friday the 30th of September with a kickoff session, and you will be practicing on your own and coming together for a nightly Zoom call with us as we go through the fundamentals of the sculling stroke. This will teach you not only the 3 key principles which you must learn before you can become a skillful sculler, it will also set out a range of different drills and exercises. Hopefully some will be new to you, but it always serves to go back to the basics and refresh yourself on the fundamentals and get those right. And we are going to be building up day by day throughout the entirety of the stroke cycle. This course is suitable for anyone who can already get in a single scull and row 2,000 meters without assistance. So even if you think you're rowing really slowly or very cautiously, or you know that there are elements of the stroke that you personally are challenged by, like balance or getting your oars off the water, this is the perfect event for you to come and join. As Marlene says, you will not perfect your technique in a camp, but you will take away and have in our online learning management system all of the tools to go home and practice for yourself. And importantly, we will start you off with a picture of what does good sculling look like. And if you, particularly the self-taught sculler, you may never have actually got in your mind an image of what you should be looking like. And it's not the same as watching the Olympic Games and seeing the national team row. It's very well known that some of them have less than perfect technique. They are incredible human specimens. I respect them hugely. But learning as an adult is very different from learning as a child or a young person. So Sculling Intensive, just search on Faster Masters Rowing, go to the search bar in the top menu and look for Sculling Intensive. It's not listed under our courses because this is something at the moment we are only offering to the people who already know us, to the people who are on our mailing list. If you're on our mailing list, you'll find hopefully a link in your inbox from the past week. But also it's an opportunity, if you are one of our listeners here, to come and join us. Now we have a question or an observation. Andrew says, more than one coach. Most masters struggle in clubs to get any coaching at all. Kia ora, Andrew. Nice to have the comment from you. Totally right. And this is very normal. People who are in clubs, in my experience and Marlene's experience, will frequently get occasional coaching from a club coach or a paid coach or a club member who gives them additional coaching. And I think that's marvelous. It's completely normal and completely appropriate, but it doesn't necessarily give you all that you need, particularly if you get a different person. Most coaches will choose to start coaching at a completely different place. If you get 2 or 3 coaches and they're all watching the same athlete, this is a very fun dinner party game to play, children. You play a video and you say, right, what's the first thing you would do? And I've spoken with international coaches like Martin McElroy and Tim McLaren. And I remember asking them, when you're coaching a new crew for the first time, after you've first watched them, what do you coach first? And the 2 of them had completely opposing views. Mm-hmm. One coached the recovery, the other coached the power phase. There's nothing wrong with that, but it can lead to confusion in the mind of the athlete. And that's really what we're talking about today.
Yes. And I think fundamentally you have to separate style versus technique, because all coaches are striving for the similar qualities of technique. They're looking for the same thing when the blade enters the water. They're looking for the same thing, the same qualities on the drive of how to move a boat. But stylistically, coaches can be very different in terms of, do they prefer a more separated sequential drive? Do they prefer a more collective drive? How do they coach the sequence on the recovery? There can be stylistic differences here. But I think in terms of the way the boat moves, technically, all coaches are generally on the same page as far as what they're looking for. How they arrive at that point could be quite different. And I like your point, Rebecca, about watching international crews. I mean, I love watching international crews, and especially international scullers, but you watch a singles final and you've got 6 people sculling 6 different ways. Why? Because they are very different. They may have, sometimes they can have very idiosyncratic styles. Sometimes coaches are hesitant to change that because they're going fast and they don't want to mess anything up, right? But if you look at something like, how does the blade go in the water, and is there slippage, and how do they start to drive, you're probably going to see like they all do that very, very, very well. So how is the boat moving? It's probably moving very, very, very well. So, there are those things, I think, that apply to masters too. I mean, there are some masters rowers who can go quite fast and they might have idiosyncratic styles, but I think you want to attempt to row a classical style initially to make sure that you're utilizing your muscles in the best possible and strongest sequence, and minimizing stresses on your body that are due to poor mechanics.
Yeah, that's really true. Andrew is having some fun watching us. At the end of the day, whatever feels good and makes the boat move. No one's going to tell you how good your technique looked when or if you come last, which I reply, except your mom.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, and then Krista Jansson is watching, and he says, Vikings don't need coaching. Well, maybe you can choose to have coaching. I think one of the major benefits of any coaching you have is that it enables you to row with other people. If you are a dedicated single sculler and that's all you will ever do, relax, row however you want. Minimize the stresses on your body by all means. But if you have multiple coaches and you feel that they are conflicting as an athlete, this can be somewhat challenging. And it is helpful if you say to whoever the coach is in front of you right now, I have previously been told this, and explain it in your own words, because then your coach can then assess whether or not this is stylistic or whether possibly you have misunderstood what the other person was trying to tell you.
Well, and I also think, for example, if we go back to the camp situation or getting input from another rowing course, for example, hearing things in different language can be very, very helpful. As I said, particularly if you're struggling with some certain element. I myself love to hear other coaches coach, and today we have more resources than ever to hear other coaches coach and hear other coaches presentations. And if you pick up one little thing to add to your toolbox, it really helps. So I really enjoy hearing how other coaches approach different parts of the stroke, and especially if they were athletes themselves, they can have really terrific insights as to how to coach the release to the follow through, or how to place the blade in the water, or how to work on the rhythm. So it can be very educational. And I think as a student of the sport, whether you're a sculler or a coach, just continuing to hear qualified advice. I think you have to be careful if it's unqualified advice.
How do you find that out? So I have this is a particular bugbear of mine. I'm going to be really clear about this, is that people listen to a well-known former athlete who has zero coaching experience and has not produced any results in, if you're coaching a racing crew, you've got to build up your repertoire, I suppose, and you've got to build up your reputation. How do you find out if the advice is from somebody who's qualified to give it?
Well, I guess can you check out, does a coach have a history and a track record? But I agree, sometimes if you're, somebody with good intentions in the club gives you some advice, but do you know whether that's good advice or not? Gosh, I don't know. And sometimes you have to trust your intuition, I think, a little bit. And was it helpful? Did it make things better? But, there are situations when I can give a concrete situation. There was a woman I knew who rowed in Boston, who was a master sculler, and she was quite skilled. She was quite a good sculler, not really a competitive sculler, but somebody who was a very good athlete who moved into coaching and started coaching her, basically was really hooked on early roll up. Like you said, if coaches go to one thing, this coach was all about early roll up. Like if you didn't roll up early, not necessarily on time, but if you didn't roll up early, you didn't know how to scull. And this poor woman, basically drove this poor woman to tears, that you don't know how to scull, and you've got to learn how to scull all over again because you don't know how to do this. And it was a really insensitive approach to this particular master's woman, who actually had very, very good skills. And I would argue that that particular element probably wasn't what was going to make her move to the next level of moving her boat better. But this was just a situation where somebody who had been an elite athlete, this was their thing, and they went at this particular master's athlete, saying, you need to learn how to scull all over again. And I would argue that no, this woman did not need to learn how to scull all over again. And I said, well, there's another coach in the area who you've worked with quite successfully. I would suggest you move and continue your lessons with that coach and keep building on the skills that you already had, rather than feeling completely defeated. So, that's a situation where, you might start to get conflicting signals and may not really be good for the advancement of your enjoyment in the sport.
I have another situation. Someone wrote to me, I'm at Craftsbury currently, and I'm thinking about joining your sculling intensive course. But I'm wondering if input from so many different coaches will confuse me for the head of the Charles. So at the time of recording, we're now 3.5 weeks away from the head of the Charles. As a coach, I read that and I said, no, don't come on the sculling intensive course, because although it's a really useful course and will probably benefit you, right now you need to focus on a big race event. I don't think I could potentially help that person right now at all.
Well,
And yet,
I think, yeah, I think you have to be careful. Like as you said, 3.5 weeks out. I think you have to be careful not to look at this time as a sharpening time for your technique. This is not a time to make big radical changes. I would really focus on what you do well, and try to improve a little bit what you do well, and then take some of those elements that you would like to improve on and make that a long-term project. Because with a big event coming up, row the best you can. I think come away from camp with some good tips that you feel help your boat move better, and save some of the bigger topics that you might work on during the year. I would say, looking at our sculling course curriculum, it's not going to be in conflict with what you're going to learn in camp. I think they would build on each other. But right now, I think you want to keep your focus on your race, and as Rebecca said, not get too much going on in your mind, and just work on things that are going to polish your blade work, help your rhythm, help you move the boat better, and stay focused on what you're doing. But take notes at camp so you know what to work on afterwards.
that's really important. And also, in the run up to a big event, you're going to be training every day, every second day. This particular camp requires you to row every day and just do drills. And that's not what your physiology is going to need in the build up to a big event. Now, you had another story, Marlene, of an athlete coming up to a big event.
Yes, some years ago, I had an athlete who was training for the head of the Charles, who was a very, very seasoned sculler. Ended up won the single in the head of the Charles one year. But the year prior to the year winning, was really on track, training was going really well, was really on track for a good race. And during the taper, say 10 days out from the race, during the taper, a guest coach came to this individual's club and said, "Oh, you need to be doing these intervals." And this coach was an elite coach, was not a coach of masters. And he overrided the athlete's training program and had him doing intervals and this and that, things that, yes, at a certain time of the year would fit in properly. But this was the really critical taper period of the year. And our athlete was excited to have such a coach there. Isn't going to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Does the workout with the group, ended up going into the race quite fatigued, and had a subpar performance. And not because the athlete wasn't capable to win that year, he certainly was, but because he wasn't recovered enough. And that's something that is, the recovery for a masters athlete is a bit different than the recovery for some younger athletes. And carrying fatigue into a race like that, which is going to be incredibly competitive, is not really doing you any favors.
Yeah, that's so true. If you do hear good things from online coaches that you want to try yourself, you might do well to listen to the episode we recorded 2 weeks ago, which is called Take New Learnings into the Boat. I'll put the link in the show notes, or just go to our blog and search for Take New Learnings into the Boat, because in it we explain a methodology for you to work out whether or not this shiny new thing is going to work for you, how to try and assess whether you're doing it correctly and whether it is beneficial for your own sculling. I would never be so arrogant as to say no one other than me has good ideas, but I also respect with what Marlene just said, it can be very exciting having an international elite coach come and visit, but you do have to be sensible about what is right for you and whether or not the timing of that sort of intervention is going to work. There we go. I think I've run out of things to say about.
Well, I think we covered quite a bit of territory, but I would, I think if for masters, and especially when you don't have a regular coach, I think, look for trusted advice. I think you have to be careful, I think you have to be careful not to chase the last little bit of information that you just saw. You have to put it into context. What is appropriate for an elite athlete may not be appropriate for you, but there may be things you learn from elite athletes that could be very, very helpful for you to put into practice. So I think you just have to keep in mind where you're at, what is your skill level, what is your fitness level, and think about the principles of technique. What are the principles of good blade work? What will help you achieve that? What are the principles of a good drive? What are the principles of a good recovery? Which is different than style. Style can be idiosyncratic. People can row lots of different ways and move boats fast in lots of different ways. But as masters athletes, you do want to make sure that you're moving your body in the safest way possible. And that means being aware of biomechanics and protecting your joints and making sure that you're not putting stresses on your body that you don't need to. So I think that's what we aim to do.
And if you do want to learn the principles of good technique and how to move a boat, particularly the 3 key concepts without which you'll never be a really proficient sculler, do come on the Sculling Intensive. If anyone who's listening and isn't certain whether it's right for them, we'll give you a 100% refund guarantee. If you listen to 2 Zooms and you don't feel you have got value, the course is currently priced at $275 US. If you don't feel you're getting value and you can't see the direction of travel of where we're taking you, we're not going to argue. We'd rather have people with us who are there, who want to learn and feel that we are giving them the sort of advice that they need. Now, if you have heard anything today that's been useful for your own rowing or sculling, please consider becoming a supporter of the podcast. Go to fastermastersrowing.com/podcast. And when you join, we'll invite you into the Faster Masters app, where you can join a private discussion group. It's not open to the public, where we talk about podcast things, and you can get your own questions answered and hear other people's points of views and war stories, which, let's face it, everybody loves a good war story. Go and find the app. It's free to download. You can get it in the Google Play Store. You can get it in the Apple App Store. Just search for Faster Masters Rowing. And when you get there, it will ask you to register. But once you've registered, you'll get all of our podcasts, everything that's on the blog. There are several courses that we offer, which are free of charge, which you can download. And of course, you can join the discussion forums, including the secret one for the podcast. So this has been Faster Masters Rowing Radio, the show dedicated to masters athletes who want fun, fitness, and confidence in their rowing. You can become a student of the sport by getting a Faster Masters Rowing training program today at fastermastersrowing.com/join. So till next time, bye-bye.